Am I unmuted, Bree? Can you guys hear me? Yes? Yes. Awesome. Yay! Okay. So what we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about what the MCRMC is going to be doing as part of the caucus. This is an extraordinarily rare opportunity for the commissioners themselves to hear directly from spouses. So the takeaways, once this is over, is we want to be able to have feedback from all the different local areas that are going to be at the caucus. So going out after this webinar and talking to spouses, gathering information, and coming armed with knowledge and recommendations to the caucus so that we can help guide the Commission's decisions and their recommendations when they make them to Congress. So in talking about that, I went to our Army Spouse of the Year, Reda, and asked her, she's one of the most knowledgeable people on policy and MCRMC, and so I asked her to put together this presentation today so that she could help educate all of us on sort of the ins and outs of the Commission, and then at the end we'll finish up with some questions and answers. So I'll turn it over to Reda now.
You hear me? Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm very excited to be getting to talk to you all today about MCRMC. I'm a little bit of a policy wonk, and so this is geeking me out a little bit. It's totally hitting my nerd space. When I put together this presentation, I know that, because I know some of you, I don't know all of you, but I know that some of you work in this space a lot, and some of you never work in this space. So what I did was I started from the ground level and sort of built up. So some of this stuff is going to be reviewed for some of you. But what I really wanted to make sure that this presentation did was provide everybody with, in this group of slides, everything that you need to know to understand what MCRMC is, what its job is, and how to answer questions that might come from your installation spouses about the process and why it's so important to be collecting all of this data. So and it's going to be, a lot of it is just overview and structure, and sort of toward the end we'll talk more about substantive areas. I know in our group we have people that work quite a lot in some of the substantive areas that MCRMC is looking at, and I know that they'll be very happy to share their expertise with the group when we get to that point. We start answering some of your questions. So with that, let's get started. Bree, oh, never mind. I see the arrow, but it's not letting me move the. There we go. Okay. So the two objectives that I have for sort of this discussion with you are, one, to give you a teachable understanding of MCRMC. I want you to walk away knowing how and why policy decisions are being made, understanding what MCRMC's role is in that process, and then being able to explain it to the spouses at your installation. And the other thing about the presentation is I want it to sort of equip you as an installation advocate, give you ideas about how to pull together the information, knowing what kinds of information you're looking for, and getting you excited about representing your community in the process when we meet with the Commission on May 8th. There we go. It's the 5 big questions that I want to answer for you today. And it might seem a little bit odd where I'm starting, but you'll absolutely understand it in the next 2 slides. First, I want to talk to you about how the DoD is funded, because where the money comes from and how it can be used informs a lot of the decisions made about programs and what changes need to be made. The second thing that I'm going to talk to you about is what the MCRMC is and where it came from. Next, we'll talk about the MCRMC's mission, and then we'll roll right into a discussion of how military spouses can play a role in the process. And then I'm going to bottom bottom line it for you, tell you, so like, this is your take home to take home with you to your installation, and explain sort of the importance of this whole process. So the first question is, how's the Department of Defense funded? And this is a little bit harkening back to your political science classes in high school and college. But as I said, the way that DoD is funded plays an important sort of role, not only in, you know, what the MCRMC is doing, but what got us here. So what I'm about to tell you is true not just for defense, but for almost all of the departments of the federal government. They're almost all funded in the same way. The funding requires two separate bills. One is an authorization bill, and one is an appropriation bill. They run through Congress separately. Both bills have to be voted on by both houses of Congress, and then both bills have to be signed into law by the president. They don't necessarily happen at the same time. In fact, authorizations almost always go first, followed by appropriations. Now let me tell you what these two different bills are. The authorization bill is the bill that sets out how DoD will allocate its budget. That's a little bit oversimplified because the National Defense Authorization Act, as it's called, includes more than just DoD spending. The NDAA is supposed to cover all kinds of security. So that's energy security, homeland security, Department of Defense. It all rolls into one, although I think it is fair to say that the largest chunk of the NDAA sort of budget is Department of Defense. There's a new NDAA every year because every year the DoD works with Congress to set sort of new goals for, you know, what programs it's going to be funding, at what levels, and that gives them the ability to shed programs that aren't working, whether there be training programs or you know, base realignments, things like that. Or, you know, for the last decade, NDAA has been very important because, you know, every year in a wartime, your authorization needs change when you move from Iraq to Afghanistan, and when you're going through periods of increasing troops on the ground, decreasing troops on the ground, your authorizations are going to change. That's why there's a new one every year. And as I said before, authorizations have to be approved both by the House and by the Senate. And if any of you have been following what's going on in Washington for the past several years, it should come as no surprise to you that it's actually very hard to get the House and the Senate to agree on an NDAA bill, because everyone has their own ideas about how defense should be run, and because they don't agree on much of anything. That's why they need people like us involved in the process to push things along and sort of be the honesty audit and make people say, you know, we're talking about real people, we're talking about national security, let's stop bickering. Which leads me to appropriations bill. The appropriations bill is a bill that tells the department that submitted it, you know, this is how much money you're getting and this is where it's coming from. And the appropriations bill is really important because you can set out in your authorizations bill sort of what you need and how you plan to spend the money, but until you have an appropriations bill, you don't actually have any money to go under that budget. And let me tell you sort of one sort of interesting wrinkle in that appropriations question. There are two kinds of spending at the national level. One kind is called mandatory spending, and the other is called discretionary spending. Department of Defense is, whoa, hold on, I did something to move us forward. Department of Defense is discretionary spending. Now, you know, your knee-jerk reaction is, wait, there's nothing discretionary about national security, but it's a little bit of a misleading distinction. Mandatory appropriations, that just means that there's a program, there's a specific place where the money is coming from, it's the same every year, nothing changes, so that program doesn't need an appropriations bill. The best example of that kind of program is Social Security. Every year, Social Security is funded by the Social Security taxes that are paid. There's no question about whether that's going to change or not, so that system does not need an appropriations bill. With defense, it's a different question because there's no earmarked funding that goes to defense. There's no particular tax that Americans pay that goes directly to defense. So then what has to happen is that the House and the Senate have to sit down and look at all the different pools of money coming into the national government and figure out for each of the different departments how to appropriate money to go to that department. So is it coming from taxes? Is it coming from revenues? Is it coming from, cuts in other places or reallocations of money from other places? A lot of questions. And you can imagine when you're doing that sort of shifting of money around at the national level, it can be a very heated discussion because there's a limited pot of money and defense is fighting for it, and the Department of Health is fighting for it, and Veterans Affairs is fighting for it, and Energy is fighting for it. And because of all of that fighting, it's actually very hard to get an appropriations bill passed. That's why, if you paid any attention to the budget debates back at the end of the year last year, policy analysts were noting that we actually haven't had a new budget since 2010. It was a remarkable thing, and we'll talk, whether it was a good remarkable or just a shocking remarkable thing that Paul Ryan and Patty Murray passed a budget in 2013, because that was the first time that our legislators had managed to agree on a budget since 2010. We'll move to the next slide. Great, thank you. Let me tell you why that inability to disagree was such a problem, and particularly for defense. Sequestration is probably the best example that we have of an appropriations fail. In 2011, if you'll remember, there was a big debate about whether to raise the debt ceiling or not. And we decided yes, but the compromise was yes, we'll raise the debt ceiling, but in every subsequent year, a new appropriations bill has to be passed that cuts $1.2 trillion of spending, and that's every year between now into 2020. And if Congress can't agree on an appropriations bill that allocates those cuts, then we're just going to cut them straight across the board, 50% from security and 50% from non-security. Now, most people, myself included, say that requiring 50% of the cuts to come from security when defense is not 50% of the budget is unfair, but unfortunately, sequestration right now is the law of the land, so it kind of is what it is. Because the appropriations bills hadn't been being passed as they were supposed to every year, we reached the point last year where sequestration went into effect because the cuts that were supposed to have been made weren't being made. When you don't have an appropriations bill, you have what's called a continuing resolution. And basically what that means is what you got paid last year, you're going to get paid again this year, whether that matches what you said your needs were or not. There's a lot of uncertainty there. That doesn't account for changes like ramp-ups, drawdowns, realignments. None of that can be accounted for in a continuing resolution because a continuing resolution just says you get the same money you did last year. When you're operating on a continuing resolution that doesn't match the NDAA that says what you need, and on top of that you are running across the problem of sequestration, you have this sort of perfect storm of resource crisis, which is where we find ourselves now. Next. Which brings us to the question of where the MCRMC came from. Okay, I mentioned that Congress and the President failed to pass budgets for 2011, 2012, and 2013. And because of that, the money that was going into DoD didn't match up with what DoD said its needs were. And on top of that, the automatic cuts went into effect because there was no new appropriations bill. And all of that resulted in this extremely urgent concern at the DoD over the long-term sustainability of its programs. So they kind of had this moment of panic where they're trying to figure out, what do we do? So DoD leaders went, talked to Congress, talked to the executive, and said, we have to do something to plan for the future. What are we going to do? Especially with the fiscal uncertainty, we can't get a budget passed. We don't know if we're going to get the money that we need. We have these automatic cuts that are going to keep coming if our leaders in Washington can't figure out a budget bill. What are we going to do? and their answer was the MCRMC. Before I talk to you about the commission itself, I want to point out, because I know that quite a few people who are here on the phone were involved in one way or another with Keep Your Promise. And you'll recall that the budget that they did pass in December for 2014 included cuts to military retirement benefits, which I'll explain to you was outrageous and shouldn't have happened. And we're very pleased that those cuts have been repealed. But at the time, we were extremely frustrated. We were frustrated because Washington was telling us, yes, we know that those cuts shouldn't have happened, but we're passing the budget anyway. And it's maddening when you have your leaders telling you, this is wrong, but we're passing it anyway. But I hope that sort of explaining to you what the lack of an appropriations bill looks like for every department of our federal government explains to you kind of where the government was coming from. I'm absolutely not saying it was right, but we had a lot of leaders telling us, look, we haven't had appropriations bills in 3 years. Defense is not the only department that has needs that aren't being met because of continuing resolutions. We need a budget, even if it's a budget that we have to come back and fix later. So we weren't happy about it, but based on that logic, we said, okay, well, we're coming back to you in January and we're going to get it fixed. And so we did on the back end. But part of the reason the commission is so important is because the commission is supposed to inform, the 2015 and forward NDAAs and also appropriations. It's supposed to try to help figure out a system whereby even if our leaders in Washington can't come to resolution on appropriations, which seems to have become the norm, that the DoD will still be okay and still be able to care for our military because of the sustainable changes that have been made. Now, of course, that means that we have a big challenge in front of us because we have to make sure that those changes, go forward the way they're supposed to. But that's actually kind of exciting too, because that means that we get to be that honesty audit that I was mentioning earlier. So, hold on. I think I need to go back one slide. There we go. The Military Compensation Retirement and Modernization Commission, MCRMC, perfect storm of acronym. It was created, as I said, by NDAA for 2013 on January 2nd of last year. And here I have the URL, and you'll get a copy of this presentation after it's over. And all of these underlined parts are hyperlinked, so you can use this as a resource to go and check it out. This is what the homepage looks like, and you'll notice that it has several of these tabs. It's very simple, very easy to work with. A couple of the ones that are going to be really important when you go back to your installations are the two on the far right. Opportunities is actually an internship program. Anybody who actually wants to try to get involved at MCRMC, that's one for you. On the far right is provide a comment. Anyone from your installations who wants to provide a public comment can do so, and MCRMC reviews all of them. So, you're going to be collecting data. You're going to go report out to the commission. Maybe you find yourselves going back to your installations and sort of providing your spouses with information about how the process worked. If there's some particular takeaway from our meetings that you want to take back to your installations and mobilize your spouses on, you can say, this is what I've heard in Washington, this is what I think we need to do next, and have them send comments to the MCRMC and make sure that they're included. By law, MCRMC is required to review every comment provided by the public. So that's one way to make sure that your voice is heard. The other way is, if you'll look at the third tab from the left, it says schedule. That is where they keep a list of all of the upcoming public meetings, and anyone can attend those meetings. So if you see that one is near your installation, I would urge you to go, and I would urge you to put together a group of people to go, because it's another opportunity to hear from MCRMC staff, ask them questions, hear what they're doing. And all those things are important. It's important to stay informed of what's going on so that you can let people know what's coming up next in terms of retirement and compensation reform. The other tabs that you see here we'll talk about a little bit more later. Now let me tell you about the commission composition. It's intended to be an independent commission, separate from Congress and separate from DOD. It's actually part of the executive branch. It's quite common when Congress wants somebody to do a study of something and provide guidance that they will create a commission in the executive branch to do it so that it's sort of insulated from outside influences. The 9 commissioners that are on the MCRMC are chosen by a bipartisan group. The president selects one, and then the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House select 2 each, and the Senate Minority Leader and the House Minority Leader select 2 each. So, for instance, right now you have 4 Republicans and 5 Democrats on the commission, and the commission is designed to dissolve after its mission is completed. Now, I'm going to walk you through just very briefly who the commissioners are. I included their pictures for you. Their very detailed bios are on the website, and you can look up and read about them. But I wanted you to know what their faces looked like, and I wanted you to know a little bit about them because we will actually be meeting with them in DC, and that way you'll be able to identify who they are. Up on the top left, you have Alfonso Maldon, who is the chairman. He is retired Army. He's the founder and president of a consulting group called Partnership Strategies. Also, for any of you baseball fans, he's a founding partner of the Washington Nationals. Very well-liked guy, very well-respected on the Hill. You definitely want his ear. Next to him, you have Stephen Buyer. He is retired Army reservist. He is a former congressman from Indiana, and he served on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. In the bottom left, you have Larry Pressler. Mr. Pressler is an Army veteran from Vietnam era, and he is a former Republican senator and congressman from South Dakota. And then to his right, you have Mr. Edmund Giambastini, and he is a retired Navy admiral and the former vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So you'll notice, we'll go through the other 5 on the next slide, but you'll notice each of these people on the commission are former military and or former legislators with a lot of experience on veterans and DOD issues. Okay. And then here are the other 5. Mr. Higgins, one moment. He is retired Air Force and a former member of the House Armed Services Committee staff, and he is also the recipient of MOA's Paul W. Arcari Meritorious Service Award, which is a very prestigious award for his service to the military community. To his right, you have Peter Chiarelli. He is a retired Army general and the former Army Vice Chief of Staff. To his right, you have Bob Kerrey, and he is also a Vietnam veteran. He was Navy, and he's a former Democratic senator from Nebraska and was also formerly the governor of Nebraska. On the bottom left, you have Dov Zakheim, and he is the former Undersecretary of Defense in the Comptroller's Office, so he is definitely the accountant in the bunch. And next to him, you have Chris Carney, and Chris Carney is actually a current Naval Reservist, and he's a former Democratic representative from the state of Pennsylvania. So, you know, a lot of thought went into choosing these people. You have what's almost an evenly bipartisan group, all of them with a lot of military experience, most of them with a lot of lawmaking experience, designed to try to come up with a system that can be put in place and run for years and years into the future. All they need is our help to get the policy right. Now, I mentioned that there were other tabs on the website. There's an About tab that has the list of the commissioners and also a tab that's called Enabling Statutes and Regulations. And these documents I have listed here are the 4 documents that sort of set the rules for the commission. The NDAA 2013 is the primary document that established the commission and sets up the rules. I recommend reading the copy that's on MCRMC's website because they have pulled out the sections specific to the commission. If you read the whole NDAA 2013, it's about 300 pages. I'm really not sure I recommend that. The version that's on the website is about 20 pages because it's only specific to the commission. There's also a copy of some amendments that were made in NDAA 2014. The biggest amendment in NDAA 2014 is just that the time frame for the Commission to deliver its report was extended from mid-year this year until February of next year to allow more time to study policies. There's a copy of the President's supporting document there, and there's also a copy of the most recent update letter from the DoD to the chairman of the MCRMC. And then there's another tab that's called Document Library, and I put this here, but it really is not for the faint of heart. There are dozens and dozens of policy documents that go all the way back to 1983. If you are a policy wonk like me, then perhaps this is the place for you because you could spend hours and hours reading there. The one reason that the document library might be good for you is that some of the documents are specific to particular issues. So it's worth a look if you or your base are looking for information on a specific topic. That's a good place to start because the titles of the documents are very specific and they can point you to what you're looking for if it exists in their library. Okay. Now that you know where the MCRMC came from and how it's composed, let's talk about its mission. I have here, and it's wordy because I pulled it straight from the law. This is the stated purpose according to NDAA 2013. It's to conduct a review of the military compensation and retirement systems and to make recommendations to modernize those systems in order to do three things. So these are the three primary goals of the Commission. One, ensure the long-term viability of the all-volunteer force by sustaining the required human resources of that force during all levels of conflict and economic conditions. So that's talking about sort of flexibility, the ability to maintain the AVF, whether we're in peacetime or wartime, whether the economy is good or bad. Number two, enable the quality of life for members of the armed forces and the other uniformed services and their families in a manner that fosters successful recruitment, retention, and careers for members of the armed forces and the other uniformed services. In other words, how do we attract the best and brightest and then maintain the best and brightest by making the quality of life for those people good and also the quality of life for their families good. Third, modernize and achieve fiscal sustainability for the compensation and retirement systems for the armed forces and other uniformed services for the 20th century. In other words, how do we make this sustainable? How do we make sure that we can pay for this system year over year? So MCRMC, if you read their enacting statute, it's a very, very broad mission, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail, but basically they are being asked to look at benefits that sort of span three different very broad categories. Okay, sorry, I'm going to take a minute. I see a question from Stacy Ferris about what includes other uniformed services. So U.S. uniformed services, as I understand it, includes the branches of the military and then also NOAA and NATO forces, and there are other categories of uniformed services that have to do with national security. I believe that there's a list on the website, but if not, I'm happy to look one up for you. They use that term to make sure that they include people who are serving in some branch of military who are not necessarily involved in combat aspects of national security, if that makes sense. So the three categories of benefits that MCRMC is looking at are pay and retirement, which very simply is the salary that your service member brings home every month, the base allowance that your service member brings home every month, and the retirement paycheck that your service member is getting if they're retired. Next, over on the left, you have health care, and that, again, that's TRICARE, that's VA benefits, that's anything, that's wounded warrior benefits, that's anything having to do with the health and wellness of the service member and the health and wellness of the family. And we have a number of people in this 2014 SOY family that work on healthcare in particular and definitely tap their brains. For instance, Ingrid Barry Yee works in healthcare, especially and particularly mental health and wellness. Susan Reynolds works on TRICARE for kids issues. I'm sure there are others of you that I don't work with all the time who are also working on those issues. We've been talking from the very beginning about the importance of pooling resources. So if you work specifically in one of these 3 areas, I encourage you to shout it out to the others so that you can find each other and work together. The third category of benefits that MCRMC is supposed to be looking at is called quality of life. And that's the broadest category. It includes a lot of things. It includes MWR programs, it includes schools, it includes exchanges and commissaries, and a lot of other items that we'll be looking at in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So let's move there, and you can sort of see the list I put together for you. Oh, actually, I'm going to scoot forward 1 slide, and then we'll come back to the President's principles. So you'll see here, this list of bullets, I pulled them straight from the statute. These are the specific benefits areas that MCRMC is supposed to look at. They're supposed to review the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. And then they're required to review these areas, although the statute says including but not limited to, which means that the Commission is free to consider benefits that might not fall squarely in one of these categories. But you'll see on the left, and especially the top left, it's mostly things that go into that pay category. And then you have things like education benefits, dependent support programs, morale programs, the resale programs, schools. Family housing, interestingly enough, that although base allowance is a form of compensation, they pulled military family housing out as a separate category. I believe that's because they're also considering the question of on versus off post housing, how BAH should be calculated, and other issues related to military family housing. The one bullet that is a little bit interesting, and again, it kind of spans more than one category, is tax treatment of compensation and benefits. That's the question of, should the military's income be taxable? What kinds of military income should be taxable? Should hazard pay be taxable, or should it not? It's also questions about how state and federal taxes might interplay. So that's kind of an interesting category. If any of you happen to be tax policy wonks, that's a good place for you to sort of provide your expertise. I definitely don't fall into that category. I'm just happy if I can get my taxes done on time. Now, scooting back to the slide before this one, I mentioned to you that the Commission falls under the executive branch. And because the Commission falls under the executive branch, it's required to have a directive from the President about how to do its job. Can we move back to the slide before this one? Thank you. I can't tell if my arrow button is working or not, but I think we're getting through this anyway, so thank you for your patience with me. So I mentioned that NDAA 2013 was enacted on January 2nd. September 12th of that same year is when the President issued his principles, the presidential principles for the Commission's work. And like I told you, you will find a copy of the President's principles on the MCRMC website. What's interesting is that the document that you download when you see the full copy doesn't actually say, it doesn't include the letter from the President asking the Commission to follow these guidelines, but I'm happy to provide you with a copy of that from the congressional record if you want it. It really doesn't add any substance, but it does have the date and whatnot on it. The President set out some very specific guidelines for the Commission to consider in executing its mission, 8 in particular, and I have them here on the screen for you. The first one is manpower and compensation interrelationship. In other words, how do you make the policy work for armed forces versus other uniformed services? How do you make it work for reserve versus active duty? All the different kinds of people who are in the military, how do you make the compensation interrelationship work? The next one is efficiency. How do you balance the standard of living and make sure military families are taken care of without burdening taxpayers? And that is another place of interplay, because we have to keep in mind that there are so many other departments vying for the same dollars that the Department of Defense is, and those dollars only go so far, and that's just a reality that the Commission has to deal with when trying to set their guidelines for the future. The next priority the President gave the Commission was equity, making sure that the pay scales are fair internally, but also that they're comparable to private sector. That doesn't mean that our service members are going to be paid like the private sector anytime soon, but equity means trying to make sure that the pay for service members keeps up with the rate of the private sector's growth, and that there's not a huge disparity between skill sets inside versus outside the military. The next priority is effectiveness. In other words, making sure that the system is scalable, whether we're in wartime or peacetime, whether the economy is good or bad, similar to the directive that was actually given in the statute itself. The next one, which is related, is flexibility, which means the ability to change with the economy, with the labor markets, with the force structure. And then looking at peacetime versus wartime personnel needs. And this one was interesting because what the President was saying with this one is, if we're in peacetime, we should be using that time to hone military leaders. And if we're in wartime, that's when we need to be using those military leaders. The next priority is motivation. He wanted to make sure that the Commission was developing a system that would encourage meritorious performance and the desire to advance. In other words, how do you attract good people, encourage them to work hard and stay in, as you know, for the course of a career. The next one is fiscal sustainability, which we've talked about a couple of times, making sure that the system is sustainable over a long term. And then the last one is force management, which generally is just attracting the best and brightest and then maintaining those people in the military. Okay. Next slide. Good. Now, this one is a little bit of a side note, but I thought it was an important one because, again, I know a lot of you were involved with Keep Your Promise, and I want to explain why this issue of grandfathering was such a very large issue with Keep Your Promise. The NDAA has a specific statute which says that the MCRC shall grandfather for members of the uniformed services who were already serving before a new system was put in place. They have to be permitted to stay in that system, or they can decide to join the new system, but they can't be forced to join the new system, and they can't be made worse off by the enactment of a new system. And then the second piece of the grandfathering is, if you're already retired, the enactment of a new system shouldn't impact your benefits. And the issue with the Budget Act that was passed in 2013 was that it completely ignored this grandfathering requirement and made cuts to not only people who are nearing retirement, but people who were already in retirement. And this was the primary reason that we were able to overturn that particular provision in the Budget Act, is because it actually violated the NDAA by its enactment. So, you know, that's the other piece that the Commission has to, you know, take into account in all of this, is how do they develop a new system that's sustainable, that's not going to disadvantage people who, you know, are already in the system, who already have benefits that they want to keep. How do they manage both of those things? Because the truth is that for a while after a new system goes in place, the DoD is actually going to be running two separate systems, because they're going to have the old system for the people who want to keep it and the new system for the next generation of military. And the Commission has to figure out how to make both of those goals coexist and run efficiently and you know, not cause huge problems for people, whichever track they choose to proceed on. Okay, so I know that that's a little bit information overload, and like I said, you're going to be getting copies of these slides, so don't be too concerned if you're not remembering everything that I'm saying to you. The idea was that I wanted to provide you with a packet you can take with you, and any piece of it you want to go back and look at later, any piece of it you need to help you talk to spouses on particular issues, you have it right here. So let's talk about the nuts and bolts though. What role can we play in this process that I've just spent the last half hour describing to you? Next slide. By law, the MCRMC must take into account public comment. In fact, here again I have part of the statute quoted. In weighing its recommendations on those matters necessary to sustain human resources of the all-volunteer force, the Commission shall, first, pay particular attention to the interrelationships and interplay of impact between and among the various programs of the federal government, especially as those programs influence decisions of persons about joining the uniformed services and of members of the uniformed services about remaining in those services. In other words, they have to take a look at how are the changes we are making going to affect other government programs, and how are they going to affect recruitment and retention. Next, closely weigh its recommendations regarding the web of interrelated programs supporting spouses and families of members of the uniformed services so that changes in such programs do not adversely impact decisions to remain in the uniformed services. In other words, take care of military families so that service members stay in. So you see here at the bottom line, military spouses are uniquely suited to be the source of information to MCRMC on these issues because we live them. And that's really the thing, you know, and if this is the one piece of the law that you take with you and show to your spouses about why we are important to this process, it should be this one, because they need our input to know what's going to adversely impact our families, what's going to make our service members decide not to remain in the uniformed services. These are all really critical pieces of information, and there's no better source of those facts than us and our communities. So, you know, we live this, which is why we have to be informing the process. If we look at the next slide, there are a number of different ways that the MCRMC collects information. First, at the top, you see input from other departments, and that goes along with just making sure that other federal government programs aren't impacted by what they decide to do. And then to the right of that, you see meetings with top brass and experts. Some of those experts might include us, especially those of us who work in particular subject areas. But mostly that's going to be meetings with DOD, with the Joint Chiefs and things like that. Things that, you know, produce good information that we can take back to our communities, or we can, you know, critique in the ways that we think are important to move the dialogue forward. But that one is maybe the one area that least directly impacts us. At the bottom here, the commission has town hall meetings, and also, as I mentioned, I showed you the button where you can submit public comments. And these are the two opportunities for your communities to be directly involved in the process, because, as I said, when they have these town hall meetings, they're completely open to the public, and they are dialogues. So when you go, they have question and answer periods. They give you the opportunity to be heard. So if you have a town hall meeting coming to an area near you, I highly recommend you attend, and that you take other spouses with you so that they can see the process. And then, of course, with public comments, as I said before, that's a place where you can collect information, you can help your spouses put together good comments, you know, solution-oriented comments to submit to MCRMC. They are required to read them all, and so the more we can be talking along these sort of productive and solution-oriented lines, the more likely it is that we'll be heard. Next, over to the left, you have community input, and that is our homework that we're going to, you know, leave this conversation and go have at our various installations in advance of our event. We're going to collect input from our communities and organize it in a way that's going to be helpful to the MCRMC in understanding what it is that our communities need. And then the last box I have over here on the left is policy work sessions. And our May 8th event is one such policy work session, but I want you to understand that these are not common. It is not common for these 9 commissioners to sit down with a group of people and spend 4 hours talking about issues on retirement and compensation reform. Typically, these policy work sessions are reserved for top brass and experts. There are some instances in which they meet with particular groups on specific issues, but just having an open forum to be sitting around and talking about all the various issues that we think need to be addressed by the Commission, it's really uncommon. So this May 8th event, although you all will be you know, attending and your installation spouses won't, it's the one place where they have the biggest voice, right? They give you their input, and then it goes straight to the ears of the 9 commissioners who are ultimately going to make the decisions on the Commission. So next slide. I put together here some ways to collect community input. I think I'm a big fan of not reinventing the wheel, and so my first suggestion is always contact your commander, contact your PAO, and see if any data has already been collected that's useful to you. Because if this has been done recently, or if your commander has been collecting information, it's a great place to start. And even if it's information that needs updating, it's a great place to mine questions and find people who are actively engaged and have further dialogue with them. Another option is town hall style meetings. You can do those in person if you have the infrastructure there at your base to do that, and they can be large or small. It's not a question of volume, it's a question of voices. Or the other option is always a virtual style town hall meeting. You can do those with Google Hangout. You can do a Twitter town hall if you come up with a hashtag that you distribute to your spouses and say, send me your input at hashtag whatever clever thing that you come up with that I can't think of on the fly because I'm not that clever in rapid succession. But in any event, these town hall style meetings are a good way to sort of collect information in a group setting. But another option, if you want to work in smaller groups, is to work through FRG leaders and key spouses at your installations. Because those can be lunches or coffees or dinners. They don't have to be anything particularly formal, just an invitation out, and anybody who'd like to, offer input about, what they think are important things to consider on compensation and benefits reform. Let's have a chat. Let's go to Starbucks and have a chat, or let's, meet over brown bag and have a chat, or whatever your option is, as long as it gets your spouses on post talking. A fourth option, and especially for those of you who, like me, might be remote, is a written survey. The tool I like to use for written surveys is SurveyMonkey, although there are other free ones that you can use as well. But come up with a list of questions, distribute it via email, and let people answer you via email, and you can put together a spreadsheet of input that you can organize in whatever way makes most sense to you. And that's a good one, especially if you're having some difficulty putting together live in-person events, but you have an electronic way to reach out to either your FRG or a group of FRGs on post. That's a way to do it. And I'm using Army lingo. I know you'll have to forgive me for that, but I hope that you all understand what I'm saying to you here. And then the last one, which is by far the most important and usable in any of these suggestions, is to recruit some local help. At every installation, there are active people, whether they are the FRG leaders or whether they are, people who are working on your newspaper, or people who are, working through some of your on-base partners. Get them to help you. Get them to help collecting information. Get them to help get the word out. Because you don't need to be a one-person show. If you can tap other resources in your community and make life a little bit easier for yourself, and build relationships in the interim, that's a great thing. Okay. Next slide. My two buzzwords when you're collecting information from our community are constructive and efficient. The efficient part we've talked about a little bit. Get help. If there's data available to you, use it so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That just has to do with streamlining what you're doing so that you aren't stretching yourself too thin, so that you're making the best use of the time and resource that you have available to you. That's just, it just requires some advanced planning, and it requires doing a little bit of reaching out. I know that there are SOYs in this group who work on issues that overlap. We've seen a little bit of conversation about that in our Facebook group. And if there are other SOYs that are working on the same issues that you are, team up. There's no reason why you can't be working together to put together the same survey, or have a joint town hall, or help each other organize the data that you're collecting. Do it. Save yourself some time and energy. Work together. It's a great way to be more creative and brainstorm. So I'm a big fan of tag teaming when you can, just to make everything easier for the whole team. Now, the constructive part, this is not anything new to this group of people. If you're here, it's because you're a leader, and that means that you know how to work together in groups, and you know how to sort of lead a group. But I think it's really important message to take back to your communities, because I know that there is a large segment of our community that is just really upset with the way compensation and benefits is being handled. There have been times over the last 6 months when that really upset person has been me, and so I know others have felt the very same way. I think the really important thing is that the Commission staff have meetings with veterans groups and military spouses all the time, all over the country, and 95% of what they hear is just complaining. And if all we do is more complaining and nothing else, we're not going to be memorable, we're not going to stick in their minds, and we're not going to, make them come around to our way of thinking. Everybody needs to vent, everybody needs to express their concerns, but I want you and me to challenge our communities to be creative and think about, okay, this is broken, what's better? What's a better way to do it? What's an alternative way to do it? What's a different way to think about this? And I want you to organize the information you put together in me, I'm speaking to all of us, so that your concerns are paired with proposed solutions, or if not solutions, at least solution-oriented questions, right? Maybe you don't know what the solution is to the commissary problem, but have constructive questions about what's happening next, right? I think the really important thing to sort of understand about all this, and it's important for our whole community, is that we can't stop change, right? Maybe we don't want the commissaries to change, or maybe we don't want TRICARE to change, or maybe we don't want retirement to change, but it's going to. The whole reason that the Commission exists is because change is coming, and the Commission is trying to make sure that the change is good. So if you don't know what the right answer is for a proposed solution, at least be asking the questions that move in the solution direction, and not some that are just, I'm upset about this and I don't like it and I want it to stop, because that's not in line with reality. Things are going to change, and we need to be making sure that the change moves in the direction that we think is best and isn't just something that we wind up with later because we were too busy complaining to propose a solution. And then the last thing, and this kind of goes along with being constructive and efficient, is don't feel like you have to taste the rainbow, right? If there's one issue that's particularly concerning to your base or particularly concerning to you, don't shy away from focusing on that particular issue. You don't have to solve all the world's problems. You don't have to be able to address all 15 of those things that the Commission is looking at. That's why we're a team. Different people are working on different issues, and don't be concerned if, I don't know anything at all about the tax implications of changing how our service members are taxed. That's fine, somebody else does. But if you are a healthcare expert, or if commissaries are a major concern, or dependent schools are a major concern for your base, focus there. Channel your spouse's energy on that question so that you have the best available data and the best, ideas when you come to the table. I think it's really important to make sure through this whole process that you make the best use of your community, and you make sure that whatever you think is most important to be heard from you and from your community is what you lead with. And all the rest of it you might have input about, or maybe you don't have as much input about, and that's fine because you've put the thing most important to you out on the table. So, what's the bottom line? One, we have unprecedented access on May 8th. We have 4 hours with 9 commissioners, and they are going to be setting the policy agenda for the Department of Defense for the future. And so this is really incredible, and we need to impress the importance of that access on our community so that they provide us with good data. Next, again, we need to just focus on what the reality is. Change is coming. We will be the sounding boards for our spouses who are unhappy, and that's fine. That's our job. But we also need to be explaining to them change is coming. We need to be ready. We need to be proposing solutions. We need to be moving our community in a positive way. And last is the opportunity, which is what we have right now to make good change. So let's do it. So. All right, folks, that's all I have on my prepared presentation.
All right, Rita, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I had a couple of things that I was going to try and get done during the webinar, and I couldn't. I mean, I was just completely captivated. It was really wonderful. Thank you. We are going to open things up for questions now, if you don't mind, Rita. I know we're at the 1 hour time limit. We are recording the webinar, so I'm going to read the questions out loud, and then so that when people view the recording, they won't be able to see the questions over here. So I'll read them out loud, and then if you want to go ahead and answer them, Rita, that will probably be easiest. Let me see. So if anybody who's in here does have a question, please feel free to go ahead and type it in the chat box now, and I will read them out loud. Let's see. Okay, question. With the organic breakdown to come of the commissaries, if I have a plan to curb that, how would be the best way to present it?
That is a great question. So Alicia is asking a question that's right along the lines of what I have been spending the last minutes talking about, which is proposing solutions. I think that the most constructive way to do that is always sort of a three-piece format. 1, identify the problem. 2, identify solution. And then 3, say, this is why I think it will work, right? And Alicia, you'll have to tell me if that answers your question. It looked to me like a structural one. But I think you say this is what's broken. I think this is how it should be fixed, and I think this is why I think that. And if you have examples or anecdotal evidence of why you think it will work, then that's where I would finish, because what you say last is typically what people carry with them.
Wonderful. We have another question from Ingrid. Should we also put a face to the stories plus the solutions and suggestions? Do you think that would be helpful, making that connection?
Absolutely. The thing about this commission is that, 7 of these 9 men are former legislators. And my experience with legislators has been that they want to hear the stories, right? They want to put a face to the policies that they're putting together. So you might not have time to tell all those stories during the course of this discussion, but I think it's a great idea if you're putting together that information anyway, to do it in such a way that you can leave it with them. Say, these are some of the stories from my community about why this is important, and I would really like for you to take these into consideration when you're making your decisions.
Okay. Stacy's question is, how is the 4-hour time block being structured? Is that in reference to the caucus itself, Stacy? Yes. Okay. In that case, I am going to, Babette, if you don't mind, I'm going to unmute you. There you go. Babette, can you?
Okay. So the way the 4-hour blocks are going to work, in truth, we have until we're done. We've just set 4 hours, but if it goes over 5 hours, they're going to stay until we're done talking, which is why this is an even more rare opportunity. But so we're going to have, remember those 3 buckets that Rita was talking about: quality of life, health benefits, pay, and retirement. Those are the things that they're going to have breakout sessions with all of us. So if there are areas that you want to participate in, you'll be asked to go into those rooms and talk directly with those people that are experts in those categories. Then we're going to come out after about a 45-minute session, and it's going to be basically Katie bar the door. And by that, I mean it's going to be, we're going to talk about what we recommend. We're going to talk about why we're, holding tight on some of these benefits and pays, why we don't want to negotiate on those, but we're willing to negotiate on other things. I mean, this is the chance to really bring your A game and put on some big girl panties, or boxers in Chris's case, and really be willing to share with them the hard realities. These are probably things they're not going to know. I mean, yes, they know, but to hear it and to have it come with recommendations and well thought out solutions is going to be extremely powerful to them. That's why we wanted to have the webinar because we wanted to give everyone a chance to really compile this information. So, you know, you're coming to DC, like Chris, you know, you're representing San Antonio, the whole joint base, and here's, you know, Chris went and talked to this many spouses, here's what they said, here are their recommendations. I'm picking on Chris. But my point is that when it comes backed up with, you know, 25 or 30 spouses or more, hundreds of spouses that have all agreed, then that validates the recommendations and the solutions versus, hey, I've got a great idea, read here in the back. And one of the things that Bree and I have been talking about sort of on the side while this has been going on is sort of standardizing the survey, where we'll come up with a survey in cooperation with Reda, and then we'll send it out for everyone to distribute to all of their networks. And that way we will be responsible for compiling that information, take some of that load off of you all. But that way when we have the answers, we can say, yes, this represents, you know, 400 people took this survey and here's what they said. And then we'll probably have at least one more of these webinars before the luncheon, possibly two, so we can work through some of these details and have an opportunity to get those solutions and recommendation feedback from everyone. I'm done.
Wonderful. Did that answer your question, Stacy? Just want to make sure. Okay, good. Okay, Babette, you're going back on mute. Okay, I'm trying to scroll through here just to see if there's any questions that we missed. If I did miss any, will you please type it in again really quick? The one I did see was, is there a way to contact the other SOYs? That Facebook group that we have going seems to be a great way. But I can also, if there's any one in particular, like Dawn, I think maybe you were looking for the spouse of the year for where you live currently. Feel free to email me, Bree, B-R-I, @militaryspouse.com. And I can put you in touch with those people. I have everyone's contact information on file. So if anybody ever has any questions like that, want to try and get a hold of somebody specifically, just let me know. And I can get you guys put in contact. Because I do know there's a couple of SOYs who don't have social media, so you might not be able to find them that way. Okay, I think I don't. Do we want to gather our main topics prior to the event so that we can split up appropriately and get all of our voices heard adequately? Yes, absolutely. That's what this webinar was, just the kickoff for that, just to get your minds thinking, get you out into your communities of finding out, gathering that information, and then bringing that prepared for the day of the caucus would be ideal. Okay, I think that's it. Do you have anything else for us, Reda?
No, I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you guys. Policy Space is where I live, so it was pretty fantastic, and I'm very excited about working with you all.
We are very excited too. Thank you. It was absolutely a wonderful presentation. I think somebody just asked when the recording of this is going to be up. I'm going to export it from our webinar service right now, and then I should have it up by the end of the day on the Military Spouse YouTube channel, and then I will also send out a link to that. And you don't mind if I share the slides, Reda?
Not at all.
Okay, perfect. Then everyone check your emails. Please, everyone, just a reminder, make sure you check your junk folders periodically. Some of our emails tend to get stuck in there. But yes, Alicia or Alicia. I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, but yes, this Alicia. Yes, I think so. Okay, the slides will be in the Dropbox. So I will send out the Dropbox link again, just as a reminder as well. Thank you guys. Oh, go ahead.
One last thing. So you guys will get the slides in your inbox, and you have the content that's on the slide, but you also have my personal notes in the notes section. And so some of the information I was telling you is in the notes, not on the slides. And so if you have any difficulty seeing it, just let me know and I'll help you find it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much, Reda. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I hope everyone has as lovely weather as we do here in the Northeast. But have a wonderful afternoon, and we will be in touch soon. Thanks.